Scotland's quest for independence given a boost by its parliamentary elections. The ruling party says it will make yet another bid to break from the United Kingdom. But will it succeed this time, and what would it mean for the future of the Union? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. A parliamentary election victory has emboldened Scotland's Nicola Sturgeon to push ahead with a referendum on ending its union with the UK. Her Scottish National Party has won the elections for a fourth consecutive time, and combined with pro-independence candidates, Sturgeon has a majority in Parliament. This means she has the numbers to win a vote in Scotland on independence. The UK government says Sturgeon still needs the British Parliament's approval to hold the vote. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson opposes the move, setting up potential legal battle if Scotland goes ahead with the referendum. Jonah Hall reports.
There might be change coming down the track from Edinburgh to London, shaking the ties that have bound Scotland to the United Kingdom since the 1700s. In the border regions, the Scottish National Party's electoral reach wanes. Here, especially, a vote for Scottish independence would have profound consequences.
Basically, I think the border and both sides of it is almost as one for people in this area. Separation is absolutely the last thing that people want, in my experience of talking to people locally. Any idea of a hard border is completely unworkable. And I think Scotland is so entwined as part of the UK that separation would just build some absolutely insurmountable problems.
There are questions about currency and travel, but more concerning is trade. England accounts for 60% of Scottish exports. The possibility of border controls and trade tariffs could do harm to the economy. And there's disquiet on the English side of the border too, where the ruins of Berwick Castle are testament to territory changing hands at least 13 times during the late Middle Ages. The walls of Berwick upon Tweed were built in the 14th century, a great defensive structure for this town on the front line of wars between Scotland and England for hundreds of years. Now, there'll never be that sort of conflict again, of course, but what may lie ahead for this border area, for these two nations, are new barriers, new defences, a hard border perhaps, with deeply uncertain consequences. In the fishing port of Eyemouth, boats are tied up. Post-Brexit rules limit seafood exports to major European Union markets. A border with England could make matters worse. For some here, there's only one solution.
I'm sure someday it'll come.
Independence?
Yes, and I think it's a long time down the road. It's worse now than when we were in Brexit, because we're still able to export our products. Now it's just a nightmare, paperwork and so forth. And obviously, the first thing Nicola Sturgeon says is if she got independence, would be to get back into Europe.
Out of one union and back into another, recognition perhaps that an independent Scotland can't afford to be entirely alone. The breakup, if it happens, will be hard felt in this border region. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera on the Scottish border.
Scotland's union with the UK has existed for more than 300 years, and nationalists have long pressed for independence. This led to an overwhelming vote in favour of a separate Scottish Parliament with devolved powers in 1997. The SNP won the Parliament's first majority government in 2011, paving the way for an independence referendum almost 3 years later. 45% of the Scots voted in favour of leaving the UK, while 55% voted against it. In 2014, the sentiment for independence was fuelled again after Britain's 2016 Brexit referendum. The majority of Scottish people voted against leaving the European Union. The UK government rejected Sturgeon's demand to hold an independence referendum in 2017. Let's bring in our guest in Edinburgh. Nicola McEwen is Professor of Territorial Politics at University of Edinburgh and Senior Fellow at UK in Changing Europe. In Glasgow, Ross Greer is a Scottish Green Party politician and member of the Scottish Parliament. And also in Edinburgh, Jim Gallagher, Honorary Professor at University of Glasgow and former civil servant. Welcome to the programme. Nicola, does the outcome of the elections set the First Minister on a collision course with the UK government over the issue of the referendum?
Almost certainly, yes. I don't think the Scottish Government under Nicola Sturgeon will be in a rush to press on with an independence referendum. I think there are many things to do first to prepare the ground for that. And the initial response of the UK government has suggested that actually there seems to be an outbreak of consensus in that now is not the time to be having an independence referendum. The battle will come in a couple of years probably, when the Scottish Parliament, with its pro-independence majority, will want to legislate to hold a referendum, and it will be for the UK government to decide at that point if they want to choose to potentially block it by referring it to the courts or open the path for others to block it.
Ross, are we talking here about a political battle or a legal battle about the need for a referendum to take place?
Ultimately, that's a choice for the UK government. The electorate in Scotland here have spoken. They've elected a majority of MSPs from unambiguously pro-independence, pro-referendum platforms. So it's now a choice for the UK government. Do they accept that democratic mandate that we have for a referendum? Do they want to try and hold the UK Union together through democratic exercises, through consent? Or are they going to move to a position where they can only hold the Union together through the force of law? If they take that latter option, if the way they believe they can stop us is not through democratic debate and voting, but through the courts, all they're going to do is increase support for independence by completely vindicating the argument those of us on the pro-independence side have made all along, that Scotland can only ever get what it votes for once we are an independent nation.
Jim, who do you think his argument will ultimately prevail? That of Nicola Sturgeon, when she says basically that the referendum is the will of the people, or Boris Johnson when he described the move as reckless and irresponsible?
I think in the end, neither of them will win outright. I think the interesting question here is what we do with the time when there isn't going to be a referendum. And everybody knows there isn't going to be a referendum for quite some time, indeed, if ever. But we've got a chance during that period to think a bit more about what the full range of choices that the people of Scotland have, what the range of possible relationships between Scotland and the rest of the UK is, all the way from independence to the status quo, and there are many choices in between, and what each of them would actually mean, especially what independence would mean, because nobody knows what it would mean for things like the currency and so on. So I think we'll see, but the UK government has more choices than simply to say yes or no to Nicola Sturgeon.
Nicola, you said earlier this is something that is most likely going to take quite some time, but what about those on the streets in Scotland who think it's about time, since the momentum is building up towards a second referendum? Don't you think that they might just feel like that their vote has been hijacked by the political establishment back in London?
I don't think so. I think we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and it seems to be that the majority opinion is on the side that says, no, deal with that first. And then when it's the right time, if many people don't want a referendum at all, of course, but for those who do want it, there is an acceptance that the pandemic has to come first, and then maybe in 2-3 years. Of course, the further away you get from the election, the more that might become a contentious issue. But Nicola Sturgeon did make that clear in the campaign that it was COVID first, then when the time was right, and she would push for a referendum.
Ross, if the stalemate continues and then the Greens, along with the SNP, decide to go for the Parliament to legislate the vote, how is it going to work out?
The election that we've just had returned a majority of pro-independence, pro-referendum MSPs. So it's very clear that any referendum bill that goes forward in this Parliament will be passed. There is a majority for both independence and for a referendum, because these are two separate issues. You can and should be able to accept that there can be a referendum on independence without supporting it yourself. It's just unfortunate that our anti-independence colleagues don't accept that democratic legitimacy. So we will, at some point in this term of Parliament, pass that legislation. Parliament will say there should be a referendum. The people of Scotland should have the opportunity to choose their own future. At that point, the UK government can either accept the democratic mandate that's been delivered by the people of Scotland and by their elected Parliament, and we can do this exactly the same way as we did in 2014 through a negotiated agreement and what's called a Section 30 order, or they can take it to court. And as I said a moment ago, if they decide to go down that legal route, they've abandoned the principle of holding the UK Union together through consent, and they've decided that they can only hold it together through the force of law. And if that's what they do, the unions are definitely on its last days.
Jim, since we're talking about the different interpretations about this whole move for a second referendum, what do you make of those who say that this was the first referendum was a once-in-a-generation opportunity, which means that the Scots have to wait for at least 40 years before they move forward towards a second referendum?
Well, who knows what a generation is? It was, of course, the Scottish Government, the SNP, who said it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I think the interesting thing about the 2014 referendum is how it didn't settle matters. The independent side paused in campaigning for a short period and started again. And then, to be fair, were given a bit more life by the Brexit issue. But if 2014 didn't settle it, who's to say that another referendum would settle it? I think we've got to think of the full range of options and the full range of possibilities and ways in which the Scottish people can deliberate upon and then finally decide upon a future which is going to be stable for them and stable for the rest of the UK. I certainly don't think that rushing to a referendum in the short run will do that for us. And it's not going to happen anyway.
Nicola, the unionists have been saying basically that Sturgeon has to focus more now on tackling COVID-19, improving public sector, particularly health and education, and give it some time before moving towards step two, which is talking about a second referendum. Do you think that this message will resonate among those who were desperate for quite a significant change in the country, those who said it's about time to go for a second vote?
I mean, you're right in that that's what you call unionist politicians are saying, but it's what Nicola Sturgeon's saying too. I don't think she is under any pressure to go early with this. And as Jim pointed out earlier, there is a lot of work to be done to clarify what independence would mean in a post-Brexit world. There are difficult issues that Brexit has created. Brexit, in my view, has definitely strengthened the case to revisit the issue of Scottish independence, because the relationship with the European Union is fundamentally a part of that prospect. But it has also raised new challenges for what independence would mean, and not least at the border between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom in the event of independence. And we saw in the campaign that the answers to those challenges aren't there yet. So I think for the SNP government, I think they will be wanting to try to come up with some reassurances around the new anxieties that might emerge in the context of a campaign.
Ross, had the Brexit happened in 2014, things would have dramatically changed. Now, do you think that the Brexit could be a moment for all the parties, particularly the pro-independence activists, to gather some sense of a consensus among the Scots and those who are very sceptical about the notion of an independent Scotland, that it's about time to reach out to each other and move forward?
We are absolutely capable of working together across the constitutional divide on how we rebuild after the pandemic. And as Nicola's pointed out, we all agree on that. No one's saying there should be a referendum on independence tomorrow or next month or the month after that. Our number one priority right now is defeating and eradicating the pandemic and then rebuilding from it. But we have won a majority in this Parliament. We've won a mandate to, in this term of Parliament, so that's in this 5-year term, hold that referendum. Now, the issues that are directly related to the pandemic, you just mentioned health and education, areas that the Scottish Government, the SNP, didn't particularly perform well on even before the pandemic. Those are areas where the dividing lines in Scottish politics are different. So I'm from a pro-independence party, the Greens. The Greens and the anti-independence Labour Party agree quite a bit on issues of education and have worked together to defeat the SNP Scottish Government on that. We'll continue doing that. These are separate issues. But for those of us who have a vision for Scotland's rebuilding post-pandemic as being fundamentally better than what we had pre-pandemic, the only way we can get the kind of recovery that we want is by having all the relevant powers here in Scotland. The kind of fairer, greener country I want to live in post-pandemic just isn't going to happen with Boris Johnson's UK government holding the major economic levers of power.
Mm-hmm. Jim, in a year, 2 years from now, if it boils down to going to a referendum against the backdrop of the limited legal powers of the Scottish Parliament and the Scotland Act of 1998, are we likely to go to the Supreme Court to decide on this particular issue?
I don't think that would be particularly helpful, but it's pretty clear what the Supreme Court would decide if they were asked. There's no real uncertainty about the legal position. I tell you what would be helpful is if the Scottish Government were prepared to publish their own legal view on this. I think we're all pretty clear what it would be. And why doesn't the UK Government publish its legal view as well? There would be no doubt, really. The Scottish National Party is quite interesting. Made a promise in the referendum, in the election campaign, to do something they don't have the legal power to do. And what they're doing is using that as a lever over Boris Johnson to say, as we've heard Ross say, that he must defer to the result of the Scottish election. And actually, that doesn't force Johnson to do it. And as Prime Minister of the UK, he's got a responsibility to the whole UK, but also to the people of Scotland, to find a way forward. Because we can't go on like this, apparently split down the middle, when a third of the population are deeply, deeply committed to independence. A third are deeply against it, and a group in the middle would actually, for the most part, like us to get on with dealing with all those other things, whether it's dealing with the pandemic, improving education, improving the NHS, and so on. Until we find something we can unite on, Scotland will be in a difficult position.
Nicola, I mean, aside from those legal considerations, you have 55% of the people of Scotland who voted to remain in the EU. And these people see that their choice, their voice has been hijacked by the political elite in London. And do you see a sense in their rationale that the call for a second referendum is a call for them to take their own destiny into their own hands?
I think that's a really interesting question. So, I mean, I think Brexit changed things in terms of the referendum, and you're right, 62% in Scotland voted in favour of the UK remaining within the European Union, and that ultimately didn't matter in a UK-wide decision. But I think it's partly the frustration around the relationship with the European Union, but it's also partly tapping into what I think your question was getting at, is that idea of Scotland's voice within the United Kingdom. And there have been some developments since then that in particular the Boris Johnson's administration seems intent to compete with the devolved governments rather than work in partnership with them and potentially undermine the authority of the devolved institutions. Now, if he goes down that path and tries to bypass the devolved governments and work directly in local communities, then I think he is potentially risking some of the value, rather than embracing devolution as a value of the union. He is potentially, I think, adding some new risks on the union side as well.
Ross, do you think that the support for the independence will continue in the upcoming years, waiting for this legal debate to be settled?
Absolutely. We've seen a clear trajectory. It's stabilised recently, but we've seen a clear trajectory since 2014, or really since 2016 in the Brexit vote, gradual increase in support for independence that then increased quite dramatically during the pandemic. That's only going to increase further because the current UK government's vision for this country, for how to rebuild after the pandemic, is fundamentally different from the one that most people in Scotland voted for. And Nicola's just raised the issue of devolution itself. So that's our Scottish Parliament, which was established after a referendum in the late 1990s. The current UK Conservative government are directly attacking our Parliament and the principles of devolution. They've given themselves a new right of veto over any decisions that we make. They are reserving the right to spend money and to take initiatives that are within our responsibilities in areas like transport and education. If people in Scotland see a UK government that is willing to not just deliberately go around the Parliament that they have just elected, but to directly undermine that Parliament, it simply proves again the case that those of us in the pro-independence camp have always made, that UK governments will not act in the best interest of the people of Scotland. They will act in their own best interests. And the only way that we can get the government that we actually need here in Scotland is through independence. There's nothing in the current UK government's behaviour that makes me think they're going to change course from the aggressively anti-devolution course they've been on over the last couple of years.
Jim, by inviting the leaders of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to join him to the UK Wine Recovery Summit, is Boris Johnson trying to, in a way or another, to contain what he clearly sees as a growing sentiment pushing for what could be an uncharted territory for the UK?
Well, that invitation is the first thing that Boris Johnson's done right in quite some time. And although Ross has exaggerated, there is a fair point in what he says. And that is, as Nicola puts it, if the UK government thinks that this is a competition between Britishness and Scottishness, it is bound to lose in Scotland. And because that's what nationalists think. The Scottish nationalists, and Ross is one of them, think it's a competition between Scottishness and Britishness. Actually, most people in Scotland want a bit of both. They're mostly people who are Scottish, but also have an element of Britishness in their identity. And the thing that a UK government does, a sensible UK government does, is try to build on that, try to find the space where people will cooperate and see that both the governments which work for Scotland can work together in Scotland's interest. So let me give you a concrete example of that one which worked well. And that is, of course, the delivery of vaccines. It was UK research at Oxford University and UK production and sourcing combined with Scottish delivery, which has made the UK a world leader in getting COVID vaccine into the arms of people who need it. That shows you that cooperation can work. If you ask people in Scotland, what do they want of their governments? More than 70% of them say what they want is more cooperation. And we need a mechanism for that, not a constant standoff over the constitution or who's wrong in the Supreme Court.
I have less than a minute, and this is going to be my question for both Nicola and Ross. Do you think that there will be a second referendum? Briefly, please. Nicola?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do, because I don't see how you get to a stable settlement without revisiting that question.
Ross?
Yes, there will be a second referendum in this term of Parliament because that's exactly what the electorate here in Scotland just voted for, and we are a democracy after all.
Thank you very much indeed, Ross Greer, Nicola McEwen and Jim Gallagher. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahlbara, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.